Hi everyone and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to learn more useful expressions we can use to talk about where we grew up. We will first listen to the model dialogue and afterwards we will explain all the expressions in detail. Where did you grow up? I was brought up in the countryside. How about you? I grew up mostly in London. Okay, first to ask someone where they grew up, we can ask, where did you grow up? Where did you grow up? We have already learned this phrasal verb, grow up, which refers to the change from a young child to an older child or an adult. Let's go straight into the speaking practice. Where did you grow up? Where did you grow up? That was great, well done. In the previous lesson, we learned to say I grew up in and say where we grew up. But let's learn some other ways of talking about where we grew up. First, we can say I was brought up in the countryside. I was brought up in the countryside. The key phrase is the phrasal verb bring up. We use bring up to talk about looking after a child until he or she becomes an adult. So we can say the mother brought up 2 children. And this means that the mother looked after 2 children until they became adults. However, we use bring up to talk about helping other people grow up. So to talk about us growing up with bring up, we have to use bring up in a passive voice. Passive voice is when the object of the verb becomes the sentence subject. And when we use the verb in its passive form, rather than doing the verb, the subject receives the action of the verb. We can form passive verbs by using the verb to be plus the past participle of the verb. So we can say be verb plus brought up. Now, since we're talking about our past, we would use the past form of the be verb was. So we have I was brought up. And then we can use the preposition in to talk about the place we were brought up in. In this sentence, we've said in the countryside. Countryside refers to the area outside of towns and cities. So we often associate the countryside with villages and farming towns. Let's take a look at a few other example sentences. I was brought up in a big city. I was brought up by the seaside. I was brought up in London. So as well as types of areas, such as a big city and the seaside, we can also say the name of places we were brought up in. Also, to say that we were brought up near the seaside, we use a preposition by with the word the seaside. Let's do a speaking practice of these sentences. I was brought up in the countryside. I was brought up in a big city. I was brought up by the seaside. I was brought up in London. Great job, well done. Now, if you lived in many different places and it's difficult to just say I grew up in one place, then you can say this. I grew up mostly in London. I grew up mostly in London. So we say I grew up mostly in and then say the name of the place. And in this sentence, the word mostly suggests that although you grew up in many different places, most of your growing up was done in London. Here are a few more example sentences. I grew up mostly in Tokyo. I grew up mostly in New York. I grew up mostly in Lisbon. Okay, so let's do a speaking practice of these sentences. I grew up mostly in London. I grew up mostly in Tokyo. I grew up mostly in New York. I grew up mostly in Lisbon. Excellent job, well done. Let's listen to the whole dialogue again. Where did you grow up? I was brought up in the countryside. How about you? I grew up mostly in London. Right, so let's now do a practice of this dialogue. We will do 2 speaking practices so that you can practice both roles. And all the lines will be on the screen, so when it's your turn, please read the line and participate in the dialogue. Let's begin. Where did you grow up? I grew up mostly in London. I was brought up in the countryside. How about you? Fantastic effort today. Well done. Okay, so in this lesson, we learned useful expressions we can use to talk about where we grew up. The next lesson is, as always, the speaking drill lesson, and I will see you soon again in the lesson after that. Bye-bye.